Okay, today we're making Italian meringue buttercream. There's three kinds of buttercream: Italian, French, and Swiss. We're going to start with the Italian one today, but I'll talk about the others while this is mixing. So the first thing we want to do is we want to put our egg whites into the bowl and get it ready to go. And then we want to put our water into the pot and sugar number 2. So that's the larger portion of sugar. So we want to pour that into the pot. And you'll notice I'm pouring pretty carefully down the center. I don't want any crystals to form on the sides of the pot. And I'm just going to give this 1 second to look totally wet before I start the heat. There we go. So you can see now that the sugar is completely soaked. So now I'm going to turn the heat on. And I'm not going to stir it. So I'm going to start slowly at first. And I'm going to bring it up on a sort of a lower temperature. And then once it starts to simmer, I'm going to turn it up a little bit more. In the meantime, while we're waiting for that to cook, we're going to start whipping our egg whites to soft peak. And we're going to add the first amount of sugar, which was a little bit smaller, to that. So I'm just going to get that started. And remember, when we're making a foam, we always want to start slow and gradually turn the mixer up. We want to create a nice base of small bubbles before we turn up the speed to high and create larger bubbles. So I'm just going to give it about 20 seconds on each speed before I turn the speed up a little bit more. So Italian buttercream is made with an Italian meringue, and that's made by whipping egg whites and then streaming in a hot sugar syrup. So before I add the butter, what we're really making is Italian meringue. Italian meringue is good for a lot of things. Because we're streaming in the hot sugar, that means we're heating the egg whites and technically pasteurizing them. So they would be safe for people to eat because we've added the heat with the sugar syrup. So now you can see I'm getting some bubbles to form around the outside of my meringue. And again, I'm only on about speed 4 or 5 at this point. I'm only about halfway up. So now I'm going to let some really good bubbles form before I turn it up anymore. I really want a nice base of small bubbles. That'll create a more stable foam, and it'll be a nicer meringue at the end. Some reminders about meringue is that everything needs to be very, very clean. Any little bit of grease will prevent your meringue from forming. So we don't want any egg yolks, we don't want any oil or grease or butter, nothing in the bowl or on the whisk or in the container that we separated the eggs into. You need to make sure everything is super clean or it won't foam properly. So now you can see I have a pretty good start on the foam. I'm going to turn it up one more. See, my sugar's starting to boil. Turn my KitchenAid up a little bit more. If you're going to be doing this in 2 separate areas, I'm lucky because I have them side by side. But you might want to get your egg whites started and to soft peak before you start cooking your sugar to make sure that you can keep an eye on both. So now you can see my egg whites are starting to get a little bit fluffy. You can see that the whisk is leaving a bit of a trail inside. So at this point, I'm going to start streaming in my sugar. And I want to do it nicely slow to not deflate all the bubbles that I've just spent all that time building. I've just turned my sugar down just a little bit to make sure that I can get it all done at the same time. Okay, so I've got all the sugar in now. And now what we want to do is we want to cook our sugar syrup to 116 degrees. So you're going to get your thermometer. I'm going to turn mine on. I'm going to turn the heat back on. We'll just see where we're at. So I'm at 108. So I just have a few more degrees to go. I'm going to keep an eye on my egg whites to make sure I don't overwhip them. They're still looking okay. If I'm worried about my egg whites overwhipping, you can just turn them down on a nice stir. And that's probably better for you and me to hear each other. Or I guess you to hear me. All right. So my sugar syrup's at about 110. And this happens a lot. It's going to sort of stall at 110 for a couple minutes while some water evaporates. And then it will pick back up again. I'm just going to turn my burner up all the way. And when I'm taking the temperature of syrup, I often use my thermometer to stir a little bit, just to make sure I'm getting a nice consistent temperature throughout the pot. So I'm at 113. Almost there. So the difference between Swiss, Italian, and French buttercreams is that Swiss starts with, my sugar's ready. I'll come back to that. So turn your burner off. You want to turn your mixer back up on high, and you want to carefully pour down the side of the bowl, trying not to catch the sugar syrup on the wisps. So maybe not all the way to the top speed, but pretty high. And you want to just rest the pot on the side of the bowl, and try and drizzle it down the side. Really slowly. You want to go nice and slow so as to not cook the egg whites. So this is tempering in that hot syrup. Also, you want to pour nice and slowly so that you don't deflate the egg whites. Once you get your sugar syrup about halfway, you can pour a little bit faster. Don't dump it in, but you can pour a little bit faster than a teeny tiny little stream. I'm going to turn my machine up all the way, and I'm going to pour slowly the rest. So you can see that took me a couple minutes to get all of the sugar inside. I'm going to whip this until it comes back to room temperature. Don't be tempted to grab the bowl and see what the temperature is. It's hot. You just put in really, really hot sugar syrup. So we're going to whip this, and we're going to come back in probably 5 or 10 minutes. And then we're going to test the temperature by putting our finger into the meringue. Don't grab the bowl. It's really not a good indicator of the temperature. So I want you to stick your finger right into the center of the meringue. But what we're looking for is that it feels about room temperature. So let's check back in a minute. Okay, so coming back, stick your finger right into the meringue. If it feels like it's room temperature, you're good to go. So this is looking really great. The temperature is really good. So now we want to go on a bit of a lower speed, and we're going to start putting in butter. So I've taken the butter and I've broken it up into smaller pieces, and you want to start a little bit slower at first. But again, I can't stress this enough. Your butter should be room temperature, and so should the meringue. Don't try this if your meringue is too warm. Don't rush it. We're just going to start throwing in little bits of butter. You also want to have your chocolate melted and cooled back to room temperature. You don't want your chocolate to be too hot. So I've just done mine in the microwave, but if you had a larger amount, you would do it in a bain-marie. So we're just going to keep adding butter. Until we've incorporated all of it. And at some point, your buttercream may look like it's separating. Normally, you're okay if you just keep whipping it. I might turn my speed up just a little bit. Don't go on the highest speed or you'll end up wearing it. But I feel like mine could go a little bit higher than I was. Now I can add my butter a little bit faster. It doesn't look like my buttercream is going to do the thing where it looks like it's separating, but if yours does, just turn the speed up for a minute or two, and it should come back together. When in doubt with buttercream, whip it. So I want to make sure I get all the butter. There we go. So you can see that it's nice and smooth and a good light and fluffy texture. So I'm going to let this whip on high for about 30 seconds. So it's all nice, light and fluffy. It's all one cohesive color. I am going to take my spatula and just scrape down the sides, make sure there's no loose chunks of butter anywhere. And then again, I'm going to really look around that little lump in the bottom of the KitchenAid bowl to make sure everything is out of there. Now at this point is where we would flavor our buttercream. So you could, in the future, make a huge batch of plain buttercream and then separate it into a bunch of different flavors. But today we're going to do milk chocolate hazelnut. So the first thing I want to do is I want to take my praline paste, which is like hazelnut butter. So it's caramelized hazelnuts that are then processed like peanut butter. And I want to just stir it around and make it really nice and smooth. Sometimes when you get it, it's a little bit chunky. So I had to work at this one for a little while. Really spoon it up. Press it against the sides of the container to make sure that there's no lumps. Okay? So I'm going to add that in. This is the world's most expensive peanut butter. So make sure you get as much as you can. Just going to get the last bit in there. And then I'm going to let that whisk for just a second before I add the chocolate. There we go. I am going to check the bottom just to make sure it didn't fall to the bottom and stay there. And I look good. And now we're going to add our chocolate. So again, make sure your chocolate is room temperature, liquid, but not hot. You don't want to melt all the butter in the fluff that you've just created here. So now we're going to take our buttercream and we're going to do the same thing, and we're just going to sort of pour it gently down while the machine is running. Okay, I'm going to drop the bowl down and I'm really going to scrape it really well one more time. Make sure everything is off the bottom, off the sides. If you have any chunks around the outside of hard crystally sugar from where you poured the sugar in, don't scrape those in, okay? It's gonna make it really hard for you to make your cake later. And now I'm just gonna whip it for maybe another 20 or 30 seconds. And it's done. So there, we have milk chocolate hazelnut buttercream. I'm gonna pack this into liter containers, and you're either going to put it in the freezer or the fridge. You want to take it out of the freezer the day before you need it, maybe 2 days before, and put it in the fridge overnight. And then the day you need it, depending on the temperature of your space, you want to take it out so it can come back to room temperature, but you want it to be a cool room temperature. So maybe take it out of the fridge, and if your basement is nice and cool, maybe put it down there. Put it in the coolest spot in your house. You don't want it to be too soft. So pack up your buttercream, put a lid on it, and then store it.